Somebody recently posted a comment on my review video of the Ibanez EHB 1005 SMS. They wrote the following. They wrote, "The lightweight is great, but does it lack sustain due to reduced mass?" And I thought, hey, that is a great question because that comes up frequently on bass forums. People are always talking about whether or not you got to have a heavier bass in order to have better sustain, or you got to have a high mass bridge in order to have better sustain. So I thought, why don't I kind of conduct my own little research with the collection of basses that I have here and find out if I can determine if these things actually have any impact whatsoever on the sustain of a bass. And so wasn't the most exciting video to produce. Actually, it was quite boring because I spent a lot of time, probably about an hour's worth of recordings of me just playing a sustain note. So not very exciting there, but it definitely, I think the video that I produced for you hopefully will be a little bit more interesting than what I had to sit through. I took one for you so you won't have to, I won't play you all that video of me just plucking strings and letting it ring out. So instead I'll cut right to the results and we'll check it out now. Okay, so the first bass in this experiment I'm doing is my Fender Jazz bass, American Standard 5-string. It currently weighs in at 9.5 pounds. It has the traditional Fender Jazz bent plate bridge, so it's definitely not a high mass bridge. The next bass in the experiment is my Ibanez EHB 1005 SMS bass. It weighs in at 7.8 pounds, and the bridge on this, it's actually got individual saddles, so it's kind of a unique bridge. It's not a one-piece bridge, so it'd be interesting to see how this plays into the sustain of the bass, along with the lighter weight and even the lack of headstock on the bass as well. The next bass in the experiment is my Music Man Stingray 5-string bass, and it comes in at a whopping 11 pounds, and it also has the Music Man bridge on it, which I would consider a high mass bridge. I don't know if technically it's called a high mass bridge, but it's pretty beefy, so I'm going to assume that it's a high mass bridge. At least it looks it to me. So not only is this the heaviest bass that I have in this experiment, but it's also the one with a high mass bridge. And so that would tell me, based on what a lot of people say online, that this will probably be the bass with the most sustain. Next bass up is my Squier Precision bass. It's just a simple little affordable bass. There's nothing fancy about this bass at all. Comes in at roughly around 9.1 pounds. And the final bass in this experiment is the Ibanez TMB 35. And I included this bass in the experiment. I thought I had enough basses already, but I thought, well, it'd be kind of fun to throw in a short scale. I know the Ibanez is technically a short to medium scale, but I thought, why not just throw in a standard short scale bass and see how it does? All right, so real quickly, I'll explain how I conducted the test. For each bass, I played 3 notes, an open B, an open E, and a fretted D on the A string. And for each note, I played it 3 times. So on one track, I would have a bass just playing 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'd hold it until it completely died out. Then I would, then I would do it again till it completely died out. Then I'd do it again till it completely died out. That way I would have 3 samples for each note that I did. And so once I was done with one bass, obviously I would do it with the other bass and do the same thing. The only exception would be the Precision bass, which is a 4-string bass, which doesn't have a B string, so that one only has 2 notes in its example. On the signals, when I'm recording the bass, to keep everything as consistent as possible, I was trying to make sure I was level matching all of the basses to each other. And when I was recording, I was making sure that all of them were tracking right the same on the input of my audio interface, right at -10, the first yellow on the meter, so that I was being consistent from one bass to the next. Okay, so you're probably wondering, well, how am I being consistent with each example here as to when the note is considered no longer sustaining? Well, I used the same criteria for every take. What I did is I made -50 decibels the cutoff. Once the signal gets to -50 decibels, here I'll play it. So here's one of the takes right here. And watching it on the output meter here, once it gets down to -50, that's when I'm considering it to be cut off or low enough in volume that it's really not having enough impact anymore, and I could consider it now a note that's no longer sustaining for the purpose of this example. I know some people will say, well, that number's too low. Some people say it's too high. I just had to pick a number, and so -50 is what it is. And again, every single example that I did here is using -50 as the cutoff so that I'm being consistent with every single note. So here is the overall bird's eye view of all of the takes that I did. I did a count off, a 4 count, and then started the recording, and I had a metronome pre-count on the DAW, and so I began recording right on the downbeat with me hitting the sustain note. And so yeah, you can see how all of the different takes, how they look here on the timeline. And basically, like I said, for each note I did 3 takes, and I also did 3 different notes for each bass. So I did the B string, the open B string, the open E string, and the open D string. Or no, excuse me, not the open D string, the D on the A string. There you go. So I wanted to have at least one note that was fretted, so that I had both open strings and a fretted note. And I could have done more notes, but you know, I've only got so much time in the day. So here you go. And so I also color coded each of the takes. The brown takes here are from my Fender Jazz. The gray here is from my Ibanez EHB. The pinkish reddish takes here are from my Music Man Stingray. The white takes here are from my Precision bass, and you'll notice that there's one less amount of takes here. All the others have 3 notes, but this one only has 2 because it doesn't have a B string. It's a 4-string bass, so I couldn't do the B string on this one. And then the green takes here are from the Ibanez TMB 35, the little short scale 5-string bass that I have. And so right away you can see how it looks like the Ibanez TMB really has a lot of sustain going on here. What in the world? It's a short scale bass. It's the second lightest bass that I have, and yet, wow, look at this sustain on that. Also, another thing you'll notice is all of the basses. Well, you can definitely see there's some variation here, like the visual aspect of where you see it kind of go into. You know, once it gets into this fine line here, some people might say, oh, well, that's where you should cut off consider to sustain up to the visual point here. But I'm going by audio, what I actually can hear. If I can still hear the note ringing out, that's why I continue to do it down to a -50 decibels. But this visual here will quickly show you how the basses line up for each note. For example, this would be the B string here on this bass, the E string, and that's something you'll see too. On some of these basses, the E string really rings out a lot longer than the B string or the D note on the A string. Whereas the EHB was pretty consistent on all of the notes. Then the Music Man a little bit longer on the E string. And then also the same on the Ibanez TMB, definitely a really long note. But on this one, it died out pretty quickly, like the other notes. But it held on to that lower volume sustain for a long time, and so that was a really interesting point for that bass. But still, you can visually see that yeah, that they stack up in a pretty consistent fashion. And by consistent, I mean that they all, each take was pretty consistent for each bass, so you weren't seeing a lot of variation with the exception of this one here. They were all kind of staying within the same pattern, which was telling me that I was staying pretty consistent with how I was recording the bass and how hard I was plucking the string to get the ring out pretty consistently for each take. And in particular, the little Squier bass was very consistent in that it was literally almost identical for each take. All right, so here's the results of the sustain test for each bass. What I did is I did the averages. I added up the averages for each note. So in the case of the first one, the jazz, you see the yellow line. That would indicate the average for the open B string sustain. The red would be the average for the open E string, and the blue would be the average for the fretted D. Did that for each instrument so you could see how they all stack up. Obviously you can't see the values on that graph, but you can at least get a visual indication of how long the sustain was for each bass. And the clear winner was obviously the Ibanez TMB 35, which was the little green short scale bass that I had. So it really surprised me in that and how well it did with sustain. Also, I was surprised that the jazz bass did better than the Stingray. The Stingray, being the heaviest bass, actually was in third place here. And one thing too to note out, obviously, since the Squier Precision bass didn't have a B string, it is actually showing in last place there, but it was actually tracking better on the open E string and the fretted D than the Ibanez EHB. So if it had a B string, it clearly probably would have done better than the EHB. And so you can kind of say the EHB was either in fourth place or fifth place. So a little bit of an asterisk there next to the P bass because it didn't have a B string. Here's another chart of ranking them by sustain that'll allow you to see the ranking versus the weight. So the blue line being the ranking in sustain, the red indicating the ranking by weight. So there you can clearly see the Stingray in third place, but it has the highest weight indicated by the red line. And you know, again, seeing that Ibanez TMB 35 clearly with the best sustain, but you know, it's got the fourth, or actually you could say that it's the second heaviest, or wait, it's in fourth place with weight. There we go. So let me make sure I get that phrased right. So it went Stingray, jazz, P bass, and then the TMB as far as weight goes. And clearly the Ibanez EHB, being the lightest weight, is either in second to last place or in last place, depending on how you want to categorize that Squier P bass with only 4 strings. All right, I just spent all this time doing this experiment on sustain, and not one time ever have I ever been playing out and thought, gee, I wish I had more sustain on this bass. So I just spent a lot of time doing an experiment that I didn't really need to do, other than just to appease my own curiosity, and also hopefully provide some information that is of interest to other people who think that this is an important topic, or have strong opinions on it, and they want to see if their opinions are line up with my results. And I know my results are not scientific; they're just my results. So definitely feel free to counteract my results or to refute them, and to do your own test and share with me the results that you have. I'm sure there'll be a lot of variety out there because, like I said, there's so many variables that impact sustain, and then also you can be using a compressor. I wasn't using a compressor on any of these examples, but you could be using a compressor that can help out with your sustain. It also depends on the context that the note is sustaining within. For example, if you're sustaining a note with a band that's playing softly, you're going to hear that sustain a lot longer than if you're sustaining a note with a band that's playing really loud, then that note's going to get lost quicker. So there's a perceived sustain versus the actual sustain. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that impact this. So, but this was at least just a fun experiment to kind of at least get a baseline for the different instruments and how well they do sustain wise. So there you go. Thanks a lot for watching. God bless you. Thank you. Hey, you're still watching. That must mean that you found this video interesting. If so, then definitely like this video. Leave me a comment down below, and also subscribe to the Worship Blender video channel here on YouTube. I've got lots of other information on this channel with other videos, other gear review videos, and all kinds of stuff. Also, some new stuff coming up here soon. What's this? Some Nordstrand pickups. That'll be fun. Ooh, what's this? New control plate for my jazz bass. But what's this little three-way switch do? I wonder. Subscribe and find out.